Darius Brooks, a successful black businessman on his way home from a career-defining deal, never expected his life would change on a quiet highway in Mill Creek, a small town with a population of 15,000, hiding a system designed to target outsiders like him. What started as a routine traffic stop spiraled into a manufactured drug charge, a planted criminal record, and a one-way trip into a justice system built to profit off innocent lives. But they picked the wrong man. Because Darius had something they didn't see coming, a brother with the power to expose the entire network. What followed wasn't just the takedown of a corrupt police department, it became a national reckoning, unraveling judges, politicians, and corporate executives who had turned racial profiling into big business. Millions watched as the truth came to light. And now, as the dust begins to settle, the real question remains: what happens next? Could this happen in your city? In your community? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Marcus Wright knew something was wrong the moment they closed the door behind him. The lock snapped louder than it should have, like punctuation on a sentence he never agreed to write. He stood alone in the small concrete cell of the Mill Creek Police Department, wearing the same business suit he had on when they arrested him outside his rental car just hours earlier. Sweat clung to the back of his neck as the flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He paced in slow circles, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had bitten into his skin. It was supposed to be a simple weekend, a quick client meeting, a hotel check-in, home by Monday, but none of that mattered now. He had heard the whispers, he had seen the looks. This wasn't about a broken taillight or a traffic violation. They were setting him up, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Sheriff Ray Maddox stood on the other side of the one-way glass, arms folded across his chest, watching Marcus pace like a man waiting on his own execution. Maddox turned slightly toward District Attorney Scott Yates, who leaned casually against the wall beside him, flipping through a thin manila folder. "He's not going to sign the confession," Maddox muttered under his breath. "Too clean, too smart, he's figured it out." Yates didn't even look up. "Then he leaves here in a body bag, just like the others." The words hung in the air between them, thick and heavy. Maddox shifted his weight, jaw tightening. "We've pushed it far enough. Another death this soon? You really want to stack them that close?" Yates finally looked up, his eyes cold and steady. "The foundation does, and the funding review is next quarter. We either keep the numbers up, or they pull the contracts. You want to explain that to the mayor, or to the prison board?" Maddox said nothing. He just turned back to the glass, staring at Marcus as if the man inside had already stopped breathing. Across the hallway, two officers were preparing paperwork. Officer Langley leaned over the booking desk, signing off on the intake forms, while Officer Decker stood nearby, glancing nervously toward the holding cells. Decker lowered his voice. "Boss, really gonna do it again? We just buried that kid from Riverbend last month." Langley didn't answer right away. He just scribbled his signature on the bottom line and exhaled slowly. "We do what we're told." Inside the cell, Marcus stopped pacing. He pressed his palms flat against the cold cinder block wall and let his head rest between his arms. He had tried to call his wife earlier, but they had laughed in his face and told him the phones were down for maintenance. He had demanded a lawyer, but no one had listened. They just kept asking the same questions, over and over again. Where was he going? Who was he meeting? Why did he have so much cash in his briefcase? They knew the answers didn't matter. This was never about the truth. It was about making an example. An hour later, Maddox entered the cell with two deputies. Marcus turned to face them, standing tall despite the fatigue in his legs. "What now?" he asked, voice steady but low. Maddox smiled faintly. "Final chance. Mr. Wright, sign the statement. Take the deal. Go home in the morning." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not signing anything. I didn't do anything wrong." Maddox nodded like he expected that answer. "Suit yourself." Without warning, one of the deputies grabbed Marcus by the arms and shoved him face first against the wall. The other moved in behind him, pulling out a small cloth bag. Marcus struggled, shouting, "What the hell are you doing?" But his voice was muffled as the bag tightened around his face. He kicked, thrashed, but the weight of two men pressing him against the wall made it impossible to breathe. His legs buckled, his body sagged, his struggles slowed. Within minutes, it was over. Marcus Wright, age 39, successful entrepreneur, husband, and father of two, lay crumpled on the floor, unmoving. Langley and Decker entered the cell moments later, standing over the body with blank expressions. Maddox crouched down, checked for a pulse, and stood up slowly. "Make it look clean. Suicide. You know the drill." Yates appeared in the doorway, smoothing out his tie as if nothing out of the ordinary had just occurred. "Get the paperwork started, and make sure the cameras had another malfunction." Hours later, the official report was filed. Cause of death, self-inflicted asphyxiation. Manner of death, suicide. Witnesses, none. Body cam footage, unavailable due to system failure. Evidence of wrongdoing, 0. By sunrise, Marcus Wright's body was gone, transported to the county morgue. The cleaning crew scrubbed the cell spotless. The morning shift arrived to fresh coffee and silent nods, as if nothing had happened. The machine had claimed another life, and no one batted an eye. Sheriff Maddox stood in his office, staring out the window at the empty street beyond. He lit a cigarette with shaky fingers and let the smoke curl toward the ceiling. "Another one down," he muttered. Yates walked in without knocking, holding up a fresh list of travelers scheduled to pass through Mill Creek that week. And another one coming. 1 month later, a black Mercedes S-Class cruised down that same highway, its driver unaware that the sign reading, "Welcome to Mill Creek," was not a greeting, but a warning. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long streaks of gold across the 2-lane highway that snaked through the edge of Mill Creek. Darius Brooks leaned back in the leather seat of his Mercedes S-Class, one hand resting on the steering wheel, the other casually flipping through the playlist on his phone. The hum of the tires against the pavement had a steady rhythm that should have felt calming, but something about this stretch of road made his skin crawl. He checked the GPS again. It had suggested this route as a shortcut back to Atlanta, saving him 30 minutes on what was supposed to be an uneventful drive home after a successful pitch meeting. Everything had gone according to plan. The deal was sealed. The client had signed. His team back in Atlanta would be celebrating by now. Yet, as he passed the faded green sign that read, "Welcome to Mill Creek, population 15,000, unease settled heavy in his chest. He glanced around. The highway narrowed into a quiet stretch lined with tall trees and rusted fence posts. A few scattered homes sat back off the road, their mailboxes leaning like forgotten relics. A white pickup truck appeared in his rearview mirror, closing the distance faster than he expected. Darius tapped the cruise control, dropping his speed slightly to let the truck pass, but the driver stayed back, keeping a steady distance that felt intentional. Darius tightened his grip on the wheel, eyes flicking back to the GPS. Another 10 miles before the next highway exit, he exhaled through his nose, trying to shake off the feeling. Up ahead, a small gas station came into view. Its peeling sign advertised gas prices that seemed frozen in time, cheaper than anything he had seen in years. The place looked like it had been there for decades, untouched by progress or care. Darius debated whether to stop, but noticed the fuel gauge dipping lower than he liked. Quarter tank. He could make it, but it would be cutting it close. With a resigned sigh, he flicked on his blinker and pulled into the gravel lot. The gas station had 4 pumps, only one of which seemed to be working. 2 elderly men sat on wooden chairs outside the small convenience store, their conversation halting the moment Darius stepped out of his car, their eyes locked on him, unblinking, as if he had disrupted some sacred ritual. Darius straightened the sleeves of his tailored suit jacket, pushing down the instinct to get back in the car and drive away. He had dealt with small-town tension before. He knew how to carry himself, head high, movements deliberate, never showing weakness. He swiped his card at the pump, selected premium, and began fueling the car. The nozzle clicked rhythmically, each sound sharp against the unnatural silence. The 2 men outside the store continued to watch him, their conversation forgotten. Across the street, a woman loading groceries into the back of her SUV paused mid-motion, her eyes flicking toward him before she hurried to slam the hatch closed and climb into the driver's seat. The SUV pulled away faster than necessary, tires kicking up a small cloud of dust as it disappeared down the road. Darius glanced around again. No one else in sight, just the creaking of the old gas station sign swaying in the breeze and the distant hum of tires on asphalt. He looked through the convenience store window and saw the clerk standing behind the counter, not moving, not blinking, just staring. Darius forced himself to focus on the task at hand. He finished pumping the gas, replaced the nozzle, and walked toward the store to grab a receipt. The bell over the door jingled as he stepped inside. The clerk, a thin man with patchy facial hair and a name tag that read Chuck, didn't say a word as Darius approached. Darius placed his receipt slip on the counter. "Pump 4, he said politely, sliding his platinum card across the worn surface. Chuck took the card slowly, his fingers lingering longer than necessary before swiping it. His lips pressed into a thin line as he handed it back without making eye contact. "You passing through?" Chuck asked, voice carrying an edge that made it sound less like a question and more like a challenge. Darius nodded, keeping his tone professional. "Just filling up on my way back to Atlanta." Chuck grunted in response, tapping a few keys on the register before tearing off the receipt. "Pump's ready," he muttered. Darius pocketed the receipt and turned to leave, the weight of Chuck's stare following him all the way to the door. He pushed it open and stepped back into the sunlight, his heartbeat ticking just a little faster than before. As he reached for the car door handle, he caught movement in the corner of his eye. Across the street, a black and white police cruiser had pulled into a parking spot, engine idling. 2 officers sitting inside. They were watching him, not casually, not out of habit. They were watching him like hunters sizing up their prey. Darius climbed into the car, locked the doors, and adjusted his rearview mirror. The cruiser didn't move. The 2 officers remained still, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, faces unreadable. Darius started the engine and pulled out of the lot, forcing himself to drive at exactly the speed limit. The cruiser pulled out moments later, slipping into traffic behind him like a shadow. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat, a text from his brother. "Jordan, how'd the meeting go?" Darius typed back with one hand on the wheel. "Knocked it out of the park, taking a shortcut home. This place feels off, though." The reply came back almost instantly. "Stay sharp. Call me if anything feels wrong." Darius stared at the message for a moment longer than he should have, the words settling into the pit of his stomach like a warning he couldn't quite explain. Behind him, the cruiser stayed close, never gaining, never falling back, just watching, waiting. Darius adjusted his mirror again, jaw clenching as he refocused on the road ahead. The shortcut had promised to save him 30 minutes, but as the town of Mill Creek stretched out in front of him, lined with crumbling buildings and fading hope, he began to realize something far more dangerous. Sometimes, the shortest way home is the one that costs you everything. Ahead on the right, An old gas station came into view, its weathered sign swaying gently in the breeze. Darius signaled and pulled in, unaware that this was where everything was about to begin. Darius Brooks pulled into the lot of the rundown gas station, rolling to a smooth stop next to the only pump that looked like it still worked. The cracked pavement beneath his tires crunched as he shifted the Mercedes into park. The station itself looked like it hadn't seen a coat of paint in 2 decades. A crooked sign above the dusty convenience store read Joe's Fuel and Supply. The windows were streaked with grime, and one of the neon letters flickered weakly, barely holding on to life. Darius sat for a moment, scanning the lot. 2 old men sat on rickety wooden chairs near the entrance of the store, each nursing a bottle of soda. Their conversation stopped the instant Darius opened his car door. Both men watched him in complete silence, their eyes narrowing as if they had just spotted something out of place. Darius felt the weight of their stares, sharp and invasive, like they were peeling him apart without saying a word. He took a breath, stepping out of the car and straightening the sleeves of his suit jacket. His Italian leather shoes made soft contact with the pavement, the sound feeling louder than it should have. He walked to the pump, inserted his platinum card, and waited for the machine to process. It took longer than usual. He glanced back toward the store. The 2 old men hadn't moved. One leaned over and whispered something to the other, causing both to smirk faintly without taking their eyes off him. Darius forced his attention back to the pump, his jaw tightening. He selected premium fuel and started filling the tank. Movement to his right caught his attention. A white SUV had pulled up to one of the far pumps. A woman with blonde hair and oversized sunglasses was unloading groceries into the back of her vehicle. She paused when she noticed Darius, her posture stiffening. She glanced toward the 2 men on the porch as if seeking silent confirmation of something. Without finishing the last 2 bags, she slammed the trunk shut, climbed into the driver's seat, and drove off in a hurry, tires kicking up small stones as she sped out of the lot. Darius swallowed hard. He shifted his eyes toward the store's front window. Behind the glass stood a man with thick glasses and thinning hair. His name tag read Joe. The man stood perfectly still behind the counter, staring at Darius through the window without blinking. Darius finished fueling, replaced the nozzle, and debated for a moment whether to bother going inside for a receipt. His instincts told him to get back in the car and leave, but he knew better than to make sudden moves in places like this. Drawing attention was never the goal. Calm, steady, professional. That had always been the rule. He walked toward the store, pushing open the squeaky glass door. The small bell above it gave a weak jingle. Inside, the air smelled like stale coffee and burnt popcorn. Joe didn't move as Darius approached the counter. His gaze stayed locked, cold and calculating. Darius placed his card and receipt slip on the counter. "Pump 3, he said, keeping his voice even. Joe picked up the slip with deliberate slowness, glancing down without breaking eye contact. "You from around here?" The question wasn't casual. There was no friendliness in his tone, just the sharp edge of someone who already didn't like the answer. "No, sir," Darius replied, keeping it professional. "Just passing through." Joe gave a slow nod, as if he already knew. He rang up the sale, handed back the receipt, and leaned slightly forward. "Be careful out there," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper. It didn't sound like a warning born of kindness. It sounded like a threat dressed up as neighborly advice. Darius didn't respond. He folded the receipt, slid it into his pocket, and walked back out to his car. The 2 old men on the porch never looked away. One of them muttered something under his breath that Darius couldn't quite catch, but it didn't matter. He knew the kind of things they were likely saying. He had heard them before in different towns. Different faces, same eyes. He got in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat again. It was Jordan. checking in once more. Darius ignored it for the moment, eyes flicking toward the rearview mirror. A police cruiser was now parked across the street, 2 officers inside, engine idling. They were angled just right to have a clear view of him. Darius stared at them through the mirror. They didn't move, neither did he. It was a silent standoff in the middle of nowhere, and he knew exactly how these things could go wrong if he made the wrong move. He shifted into drive and pulled out of the lot, easing back onto the main road. The cruiser waited a few seconds, then pulled out behind him, keeping a steady distance. Darius focused on his breathing, on the road, on keeping his speed exact. He knew the drill: no sudden moves, no reason to give them anything they could use. The cruiser didn't fall back. It didn't move closer. It just sat there like a shadow in his rearview mirror. The town stretched out ahead, empty sidewalks and boarded-up windows lining both sides of the street. Every stoplight seemed too long. Every glance felt like a threat. Darius gripped the steering wheel tighter. He could feel it building, the inevitable pressure, the waiting game he was losing with every mile. And then it happened. Red and blue lights exploded in his rearview mirror, flashing bright against the fading daylight. The cruiser's siren gave a short burst. Darius exhaled slowly, pulling the car to the shoulder of the road. His mind began to race, but his hands stayed steady on the wheel, because deep down, he knew he had driven right into their net. Darius pulled over onto the shoulder as the cruiser's lights spun violently behind him. He kept his hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, fingers locked tight, breathing slow and controlled. His heart pounded harder than he wanted to admit, but his face stayed neutral. He knew the playbook. He had lived long enough to recognize when something felt wrong, and this felt very wrong. The cruiser rolled to a stop a few feet behind him. Seconds stretched into a small eternity before the driver's door opened. Officer Rick Langley stepped out first. Tall, heavy-set, bald under his campaign hat, with mirrored sunglasses reflecting the late afternoon light. His partner, Officer Carl Decker, followed, thinner, younger, but just as stone-faced. Decker stayed back near the cruiser, one hand resting casually on his holstered weapon, while Langley approached the driver's side window with slow, deliberate steps. Darius cracked the window halfway, keeping his hands visible on the wheel. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Langley didn't smile. He didn't offer any greeting. His voice came low and flat. "License and registration." Darius nodded, moving slowly, deliberately reaching for his wallet on the passenger seat. He pulled out his license and handed it through the window. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Langley tilted his head slightly, as if amused that Darius dared to ask. "Taillights out," he answered without hesitation. Darius blinked. "That's not possible. The car was serviced last week. All lights were checked this morning." Langley's lips curled into a slow smirk. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Darius felt the tension spike in his chest. His mind raced, calculating options, but he knew there was only one move to make: compliance, calm, control. He reached for the door handle and stepped out onto the gravel shoulder, adjusting his suit jacket as he did. Langley motioned for him to place his hands on the car. "Feet back, hands on the vehicle." Darius swallowed the anger rising in his throat. He spread his hands on the smooth surface of the Mercedes, feet planted firmly. Langley patted him down aggressively, searching for any reason to escalate this stop further. Decker circled around the back of the car, peeking into the windows before stepping toward the trunk. "Mind if I take a look back here?" Decker called out loud enough for Darius to hear. Darius turned his head slightly. "I don't consent to any searches, officer." Langley laughed under his breath. "Look at this guy. Knows his rights." He leaned in close to Darius's ear, his breath hot and sour. "That's cute, but you're not going to talk your way out of this." Without waiting for permission, Decker popped the trunk. Darius heard the latch release, heard the trunk lid lift. His fists clenched unconsciously. Langley pressed a hand into his shoulder, keeping him pinned. Decker made a show of rummaging around for a moment before calling out, "Well, look what we have here." Darius turned his head further, straining to see. Decker held up a small plastic bag filled with a white, powdery substance, waving it like he had just won a prize at the fair. Darius's throat went dry. "That's not mine," he said flatly. Langley leaned back and laughed loudly. "Of course it's not. It never is." Darius clenched his jaw. "I want to see your body camera footage. You had no probable cause to open my trunk. I never gave you consent." Langley straightened up, stepping in front of Darius, pulling off his sunglasses to reveal cold, unforgiving eyes. "Body cam footage? Funny you should ask. Looks like our cameras had another malfunction today. Shame. Really, no footage means your word against ours." Decker approached, slipping the plastic bag into an evidence pouch with exaggerated care. "You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute," he announced. Darius felt cold metal clamp around his wrists as Langley secured the cuffs. He gritted his teeth. "This is a setup. You both know it." Langley leaned in again, lowering his voice to a poisonous whisper. "You're in our town now, boy, and around here the law says you're guilty until we say otherwise." Darius didn't resist as they pushed him toward the cruiser. He kept his head high, his heart pounding, his mind already running through every legal strategy he knew. They shoved him into the back seat, the door slamming shut with finality. Through the window, he watched Decker close the trunk with a satisfied grin. The cruiser pulled away from the shoulder, merging back onto the empty highway. Darius sat in silence, staring straight ahead. He knew exactly what they had done, and he knew exactly who he needed to call when he got his one phone call, if they even gave him that much. One thing was certain. They thought they had just taken down another easy target. What they didn't know was that this target wasn't playing by their script. The Mill Creek Police Department sat at the end of a quiet street, its brick exterior weathered by decades of storms and neglect. The parking lot was nearly empty when Officer Langley pulled the cruiser in, cutting the engine without saying a word. Darius sat motionless in the back seat, his wrists cuffed tightly behind him, the circulation in his hands starting to go numb. He kept his face blank, showing nothing. No fear, no anger, no panic. He knew the moment he showed weakness, they would push harder. He watched Langley and Decker step out of the vehicle, stretch like they had just finished a casual lunch, and make their way to his door. Decker opened it first, grabbing Darius by the arm with more force than necessary. "Out," he ordered. Darius obeyed without resistance, stepping onto the cracked pavement. Langley leaned in close again, voice low. "No sudden moves. City boy, you're not in Atlanta anymore." They marched him inside, past a cracked glass door that read Mill Creek Police Department in faded gold lettering. The air smelled of coffee gone cold and sweat baked into the walls. The front desk sergeant, Hank, looked up as they entered. He was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and a mustache that twitched when he spoke. "Another one already?" Hank asked, raising an eyebrow. Langley grinned. "Caught him with a bag full of snow in the trunk. Classic runner profile." Hank stood, walking around the desk to get a better look at Darius. "Fancy suit, big city plates. You boys really do have a type." Langley shoved Darius toward the booking area. "Run him through. Get the paperwork started." Darius stood firm. "I want my phone call," he stated, voice calm but direct. Hank turned back toward him slowly, eyes narrowing. "What's that?" "My phone call," Darius repeated. "It's my legal right." Hank laughed under his breath, exchanging a glance with Langley and Decker. "Phones are down. System's offline. You'll get your turn when it's back up." Darius clenched his jaw but said nothing more. He had expected this. They pushed him toward the fingerprint station. Langley pressed each of Darius's fingers onto the scanner with unnecessary force, rolling them side to side like Darius was already convicted. Decker stood nearby, filling out paperwork on a clipboard with mechanical precision. "Name?" Hank asked without looking up. "Darius Brooks," Darius answered. Hank typed it in slowly, deliberately. "Date of birth?" Darius provided the information, watching as Hank's fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than they should have. "Previous arrests?" Hank asked casually. "None," Darius answered firmly. Hank smirked, glancing up. "We'll see about that." Langley moved toward a nearby cabinet and pulled out a file. He handed it to Hank without saying a word. Hank opened it, flipping through several sheets before nodding to himself. "Looks like you've been busier than you remember. Mr. Brooks, 3 priors for possession, 1 in Alabama, 1 in Mississippi, and another right here in Georgia." Darius felt his stomach drop, but his face stayed stone still. "That's a lie," he said through clenched teeth. "I've never been arrested in my life." Hank leaned over the desk, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "According to our records, you have, and in about 20 minutes, you'll be a repeat offender with intent to distribute. Congratulations." Darius took a slow breath, controlling the rage boiling beneath his skin. He knew they were fabricating everything, but he also knew arguing here would do nothing. They had the upper hand, for now. "I want a lawyer," Darius demanded, louder this time. Hank leaned back in his chair, stretching. "Sure thing. Right after you finish processing." They walked him through the rest of the booking routine with cold efficiency. Mug shots from multiple angles, a second round of fingerprinting, a strip search behind a curtain that felt more like humiliation than procedure. They handed him an orange jumpsuit, forcing him to change under their watchful eyes. Every move they made was designed to strip him of control, to wear him down before he ever saw a courtroom. When they were finished, Langley grabbed his arm again, leading him toward the holding cells at the back of the station. They passed a few empty cells before stopping at one with a metal bench bolted to the wall and a small toilet in the corner. Langley unlocked the door and shoved Darius inside. The door clanged shut behind him with a sound that felt heavier than steel. Darius stood there for a moment, staring at the peeling paint on the walls, listening to the distant hum of the air conditioning kicking on and off. He sat down on the cold bench, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, mind racing. He had to get to a phone. He had to reach Jordan. But every second they delayed made that seem less likely. He glanced toward the wall on his right, noticing a small vent near the ceiling. From somewhere nearby, he heard the faintest whisper, "They did it to me too." Darius froze, tilting his head toward the voice. He couldn't see anyone, but the voice was clear enough to be real. "Who's there?" he asked quietly. The voice came again, low and tired. "Cell next door. Name's Jackson. I've been here 3 days. Same setup, same charges." Darius stood, moving closer to the wall. "You didn't do it either?" "Not a chance," Jackson replied. "I'm a consultant from Denver. Came through town on business. They pulled me over, planted the same garbage in my car. I tried to fight it, and they stuck me in here." Darius leaned his head against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. He had suspected he wasn't the first, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach twist. "Have they let you call anyone?" Darius asked. "Not a soul," Jackson whispered. "Phones have been down since I got here, and if you make too much noise, they threaten to add more charges." Darius clenched his fists at his sides. He had walked right into a machine that had done this before, probably dozens of times, maybe more. But they had made one mistake. They had picked the wrong target this time. Darius looked up at the small window near the ceiling, the faint outline of dusk slipping into darkness. He knew what he had to do next. He had to hold his ground until he got to that phone, because this wasn't the first time they had done this, but it just might be the last. Darius paced the length of the tiny cell, counting his steps like it might somehow give him control over a situation he couldn't control. 8 paces to the wall, 8 paces back, over and over again. The hum of the overhead lights never stopped, a low, static sound that drilled into his brain the longer he sat under it. There was no clock, no window he could reach. Time stretched, slow and heavy, bending his focus until minutes felt like hours. He couldn't tell how long he had been there when the voice came again, low and steady from the other side of the cinder block wall. "You still standing, new guy?" Darius stopped pacing. He looked toward the vent near the ceiling. He could barely make out the shadow of a man sitting in the cell next to his. Darius stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "Still standing," he replied. "Name's Darius Brooks, Atlanta." The man on the other side let out a quiet breath, almost like a half laugh. "Marcus Jackson, Denver. Been in this damn hole for 3 days." Darius leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "What did they say you did?" Jackson shifted on the other side. "Same thing they told you, I bet. Drugs in the car, intent to distribute, resisting arrest. They've got a script. They don't even bother to change the words anymore." Darius let his head rest against the wall. "They pulled me over for a fake taillight. Found a bag in my trunk that wasn't mine. Said the cameras were down. Same story?" "Exactly the same," Jackson answered without hesitation. "And if you push too hard, they'll add more charges. Or worse." Darius didn't like the way Jackson said that last part. He took a breath, choosing his next words carefully. "Why you? Why me? This feels too organized to be random." Jackson was quiet for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice dropped lower. "Because we fit the profile. Out-of-towners, black, successful, no local ties, easy to make us look guilty, easier to make us disappear." Darius clenched his jaw. "How many others have they done this to?" "Too many," Jackson replied. "I've seen 5 come through just while I've been in here. 2 took plea deals the same day. 1, they said he hung himself. I don't believe it for a second." Darius felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. His mind flashed back to the way they had paraded him through booking, how they had fabricated a criminal record that didn't exist, how they had all played their parts without hesitation like they had done it before, over and over again. "How do you know all this?" Darius pressed. Jackson shifted again, leaning closer to the wall. "Because I've been watching them, listening. I was sent here to investigate something bigger than this town. I just didn't expect to get caught in it myself." Darius narrowed his eyes. "Sent by who?" Jackson paused, as if measuring how much to say. "Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. I've been undercover for months. This place is worse than we thought. It's not just Mill Creek. There's a network, small towns just like this one, feeding arrests into the same private prison pipeline. It's a machine built on numbers, quotas, asset seizures, and the bigger the target, the bigger the payday." Darius pressed his back to the wall, trying to process what he was hearing. "So what? They pick people like us because they know no one here will defend us. They turn us into statistics to keep the money flowing." "That's the game," Jackson confirmed. "And they're good at it. They have judges in their pocket, DAs, sheriffs, even some state officials. Every arrest feeds the machine. Every conviction justifies their funding. And every innocent man who disappears keeps their numbers looking clean." Darius felt the weight of it settle in his chest. He had suspected corruption, but not like this. Not this deep, not this calculated. "So, what's the play?" Darius asked. "How do we stop it?" Jackson's voice dropped even lower. "We need to expose them, but I've hit a wall. My cover's been blown. I've already tried to make contact with my team, but they've blocked every call, every message. You're the first new face they've let through in days. That means they're either getting sloppy or they're planning something worse. Darius ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. He could feel the trap closing tighter around both of them. He leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling like the answers might be hiding in the flickering lights. "I have a brother," Darius whispered. "He works for the DOJ, higher than your division. If I can get to a phone, I can reach him." Jackson's voice sharpened. "What's his name?" "Jordan Brooks," Darius replied. "United States Attorney General." The silence on the other side of the wall stretched long enough to make Darius wonder if Jackson was still there. When Jackson finally spoke, there was something new in his voice, something heavier. "You're serious?" Darius nodded, even though Jackson couldn't see him. "Dead serious." Jackson let out a slow breath. "If that's true, you're their worst nightmare." Darius closed his eyes. "They don't know who I am. Not yet, but they're about to." The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Heavy boots, slow, deliberate. Jackson whispered quickly, "Careful what you say next." "That sounds like Maddox." Darius stood, rolling his shoulders like he hadn't just heard something that could change everything. He stepped back from the wall, standing in the center of the cell as the footsteps grew louder. The lock on the cell door clanked. The handle turned. Sheriff Ray Maddox stepped inside, blocking the light from the hallway with his massive frame. His face twisted into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Darius met his stare head-on, refusing to flinch. He didn't need Jackson to tell him what Maddox was here for. He already knew, and this time, he was ready. Sheriff Ray Maddox stood in the doorway of the cell, one hand gripping the frame, the other resting lazily on his belt like he had all the time in the world. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, staring at Darius like he was studying an animal trapped in a cage. His face was unreadable at first, but then, slowly, the corners of his mouth twisted into a grin that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. Darius stayed where he was, feet planted firmly on the ground, arms crossed. He refused to be the one to speak first. He wasn't about to give Maddox the satisfaction. Maddox stepped inside, letting the door swing half-closed behind him. The heavy clank of the lock catching halfway sounded intentional, like a reminder that Darius wasn't going anywhere. "You're a quiet one," Maddox finally said, his voice low and smooth, the kind of voice used by men who knew they had the upper hand. "Most folks start running their mouths by now, begging, making deals, explaining how they're the victim." Darius didn't move, didn't blink. Maddox took a few more steps inside, stopping just feet away. "Not you, though," Maddox continued. "You've been playing it cool since we brought you in, like you think you've got some kind of leverage." Darius narrowed his eyes but stayed silent. Maddox chuckled under his breath, rocking back on his heels. "Let me guess, you think you're smarter than the last guy who stood right where you're standing? You think you got some card to play?" Darius leaned forward just slightly, keeping his voice low and steady. "You're sloppy. You ran the same play on too many people. Someone's going to notice." Maddox's grin widened, but his eyes darkened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "No one's coming for you. This town runs on people like you passing through, thinking you're untouchable. You're just another number to us, another file on a desk, and by the time you realize that, it'll be too late." Darius didn't flinch. "I want my phone call," he said, each word measured and sharp. Maddox leaned in, close enough that Darius could feel his breath. "Phones are down, like I said. System's been offline all night." Darius held Maddox's stare, refusing to break. "That's a violation of my rights." Maddox let out a dry laugh. "Rights? You really think those apply here? This isn't a courtroom. This isn't a city where people care what happens behind these walls. You crossed into our jurisdiction. Out here, your rights are whatever I say they are." Darius felt his fists clench at his sides, nails digging into his palms. He wanted to swing, to wipe that smirk off Maddox's face, but he knew better. That's exactly what they wanted, an excuse to escalate. Maddox circled slowly, like a predator sizing up prey. "You think you're different," he murmured, "but you're not. You're just another one of them, running your mouth, flashing your cash, thinking you're above the law." Darius's jaw tightened. "You planted that bag in my trunk. You fabricated that record. You and your crew have been doing this for years. You think I don't see it?" Maddox stopped pacing, standing just behind Darius now. "Careful," he whispered, his voice dripping with false patience. "You keep talking like that, and things get worse. A lot worse." Darius turned his head slightly, eyes cold. "What's worse? Another fake charge? Another false confession? Go ahead, add it to the list. You're sloppy, and when people get sloppy, they get caught." Maddox's grin faltered for a split second, but he recovered quickly, stepping back around to face Darius again. "You want to play hardball? Fine. Let's see how long you last when the deal's off the table. You'll be lucky to see daylight before you're 50. Darius shook his head slowly. "I'm not signing anything." Maddox leaned in again, lowering his voice to a level only Darius could hear. "Let me paint you a picture. You fight this, you drag it out, you think you got some shot in court. Meanwhile, you rot in a cell while we build a case so thick you won't see the outside of a prison wall for 15 years minimum. You'll lose your business, your reputation, your family. And the moment you think you're about to catch a break, some clerk in a back office misplaces your paperwork, and you get another 2 years tacked on for a charge you've never even heard of." Darius's breathing stayed slow and controlled, but his blood was boiling under the surface. Maddox stepped back, brushing imaginary dust off his badge. "Or you could make it easy on yourself. Take the deal, plead out, pay the fine, serve a little probation, walk away before this thing really ruins your life." Darius shook his head again. "You're wasting your breath." Maddox sighed dramatically, walking toward the door. "Suit yourself. I'll send the DA in. He's got a special offer just for you." Darius watched him go, his fists still clenched at his sides. Maddox paused in the doorway, turning back one last time, the smirk returning to his face. "You think you've got the upper hand," he said softly, "but you're standing in a cage. Remember that." The door slammed shut behind him, the lock clicking with deliberate finality. Darius let out a slow breath, rolling his neck to release the tension. His mind was racing, but he refused to show it. He knew Maddox was bluffing. He had to be, but that didn't make this any less dangerous. Across the wall, Jackson's voice came again, barely above a whisper. "You good?" Darius nodded to himself. "I'm good." He sat down on the bench again, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. He stared at the door, waiting. Maddox had played his hand. Now it was time for the next move. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway once more. This time slower, smoother, more calculated. Darius didn't need to look up to know who was coming. He had heard about men like Scott Yates before, men who made a living turning leverage into power. The DA was coming, and this time, the price of freedom was about to be named. The door creaked open again, but this time the man who entered didn't bother to wear a uniform. Scott Yates, District Attorney of Mill Creek County, walked in like he owned the building. Sharp suit, polished shoes, expensive watch flashing under the cheap fluorescent lights. He carried a leather folder in one hand and a fake look of concern on his face. He closed the door carefully behind him, making sure the lock clicked with just the right amount of pressure. Darius stayed seated on the metal bench in the corner of the cell, arms resting on his knees, refusing to stand. He had seen this move before, A polished suit didn't impress him. Yates approached slowly, like a lawyer pacing a courtroom he already controlled. He stopped just inside the cell, tilting his head slightly as if he was looking at something fragile. "Mr. Brooks," Yates began, his voice calm and smooth like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror 100 times. "I imagine this has been a long night for you." Darius didn't reply. He leaned back against the wall, stretching his legs out in front of him, forcing Yates to step closer if he wanted to continue his little performance. Yates smiled like it didn't bother him. "Let me cut to the chase. We can make this easy. You plead guilty to a lesser charge, simple possession, and I recommend probation. No jail time, no fine. You walk out of here today." Darius stared at him, unimpressed. "I'm not pleading guilty to something I didn't do." Yates sighed softly, like he had expected the answer. "I understand. Really, I do. But you should think carefully before you lock yourself into a fight you cannot win." Darius leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You think I can't win because you've rigged the system?" Yates raised an eyebrow, pretending to be offended. "Mr. Brooks, this isn't personal. It's just business. You were found with a substantial amount of narcotics in your vehicle. Multiple witnesses placed you at a gas station acting suspiciously. Add that to your existing record." "I don't have a record," Darius cut in sharply. "That's fiction you created." Yates chuckled quietly, flipping open the leather folder. He held up a printed sheet and waved it like proof. "Not according to our files. You've been a very busy man in 3 states. Darius stood now, stepping forward until there was only a foot of space between them. "That's not my record, and you know it." Yates didn't move. He didn't flinch. He closed the folder slowly, tapping it against his palm. "Mr. Brooks, this can go one of 2 ways. You take the deal and put this behind you, or you fight it and find yourself facing 15 years minimum, maybe more. It's your choice. But I'll be honest with you, nobody beats this system. Not here. Not in this town." Darius stared him down, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "No one's beaten you yet. That doesn't mean it can't be done." Yates laughed again, but it sounded thinner now, like Darius had touched a nerve. He cleared his throat, adjusting his cufflinks. "You have until noon to decide," he said, turning toward the door. "After that, the offer's off the table." Darius crossed his arms, standing his ground. "I want my phone call." Yates paused, hand on the door handle. "Still playing that card?" "It's not a card," Darius replied. "It's my right." Yates leaned his head against the door for a moment, like he was considering something too complicated for Darius to understand. Then he turned back, forcing another thin smile. "Fine, you'll get your call, but when you realize no one's coming to save you, you'll wish you had taken the deal." The door creaked open, and Yates stepped out, leaving Darius standing alone. But Darius knew better. He knew exactly who to call, because he wasn't planning on fighting this system from the outside. He was going to tear it apart from within. The door slammed shut, but this time, the sound didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a signal. A moment later, a deputy arrived at the cell door, keys jangling at his hip. Without a word, he unlocked the door and motioned for Darius to follow. The hallway smelled of bleach and stale air, but all Darius could focus on was the phone sitting on the desk at the end of the corridor. His fingers itched to grab it. His brother was one phone call away, and once that call went through, nothing in Mill Creek would ever be the same. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, every step Darius took sounding louder than it should have on the old tile floor. The deputy leading him didn't speak, didn't even look back. The air smelled like dust and stale coffee, and the weight of what was about to happen pressed hard on Darius's chest. At the end of the hallway sat a battered wooden desk with a black corded phone resting on top. Behind the desk, A dispatcher sat with her arms crossed, chewing gum like she couldn't care less who walked by. Darius knew better. Everyone in this building cared about what was happening right now. They just didn't want to show it. Sheriff Maddox stood in the corner near the file cabinets, arms crossed over his chest, watching like a hawk. His face still carried that smug grin, the same one he'd worn since the moment they'd dragged Darius in. He didn't say a word, but the way he leaned against the wall made it clear he thought this was all just theater. Darius walked up to the desk, flexing his fingers as the deputy reached down and unlocked one cuff, leaving the other clipped to a chain bolted to the desk leg. It was a message. One hand free, the other still theirs. Darius didn't care. All he needed was a dial tone. The dispatcher leaned back, sighing like she was already bored. "You got one call. Make it quick." Darius picked up the handset, pressed the receiver to his ear, and heard the familiar hum of the open line. He dialed the number he had memorized since college, the personal, direct number to Jordan's private line in D.C. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Darius could feel Maddox's eyes burning into his back. On the 4th ring, the call connected. "Jordan Brooks," came the voice on the other end. Calm, professional, clipped. Darius swallowed once, then spoke loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "Jordan, it's me. It's Darius. I'm being held in Mill Creek, Georgia, falsely arrested. Drugs planted in my car, fabricated record. You need to hear this." The room shifted. The dispatcher stopped chewing. Maddox straightened from the wall. For the first time since Darius had arrived, the air changed. "Are you hurt?" Jordan's voice tightened instantly. Darius pressed the phone tighter to his ear. "I'm fine. But this place, it's a machine. Jordan, they've done this before. I'm not the first. They're manufacturing cases, targeting travelers, seizing property. It's bigger than just me." There was silence on the other end, just the faint sound of Jordan breathing. When he spoke again, his voice was sharper, heavier with authority. "Put the sheriff on the line." Darius turned slowly, meeting Maddox's eyes. "He wants to speak to you." Maddox didn't move at first. His face drained of color, just for a second, before he forced a smirk back into place. He pushed off the wall, swaggered over like it didn't matter, and snatched the phone from Darius's hand. "This is Sheriff Maddox," he said flatly. "Who's this?" The line on the other end seemed to freeze the air in the room. "This is United States Attorney General Jordan Brooks, and you're holding my brother illegally." The color drained from Maddox's face completely this time. He swallowed hard, looking around the room as if searching for backup that wasn't coming. The dispatcher sat frozen, her eyes wide. The deputy stepped back like the floor had just shifted beneath him. Maddox licked his lips, forcing his voice to steady. There must be some misunderstanding. "Sir, save it," Jordan cut him off, his voice cold as steel. "I am authorizing immediate federal oversight of your department. As of this moment, every officer, every file, every case is under federal review. If my brother isn't released immediately and treated with the full rights you've denied him, you will answer for it personally. Do I make myself clear?" Maddox gripped the phone tighter, sweat forming on his temple. "Of course, sir. Absolutely. We'll cooperate fully." Darius watched Maddox squirm, watched the mask crumble. He had never seen a man lose control so fast. "Good," Jordan replied, "because if so much as a paperclip goes missing before my team arrives, I'll make sure you and everyone in that building spend the rest of your lives explaining yourselves in federal court." Maddox's hand shook as he lowered the phone, hanging it up with more care than Darius thought he was capable of. The room had gone silent. The air felt like it had been vacuumed out. Maddox turned to the deputy, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get him out of those cuffs." The deputy didn't move. Maddox snapped, louder this time. "Now!" The key jingled as the deputy hurried to unlock the remaining cuff. Darius stood slowly, rubbing his wrists as Maddox stumbled backward like a man trying to stop a train with his bare hands. Darius leaned in just enough for Maddox to hear him. "Looks like your machine just broke." Maddox didn't respond. He just stared at Darius like he had seen a ghost. Darius stepped away from the desk, standing taller than he had all night. He could feel the shift in the room, the fear, the cracks forming in their walls of arrogance. He wasn't just some businessman from out of town anymore. He was the crack that was about to split their entire operation wide open. Maddox turned to the dispatcher, voice shaken as he barked into the radio. "Get the DA, now!" Darius smiled to himself as he turned toward the door, because somewhere out there, the FBI was already on the move. The night stretched into early morning, but the air around Mill Creek Police Department felt heavier than ever. Outside, a slow fog began to creep across the parking lot, curling around the worn patrol cars lined up like they were waiting for a parade that would never come. Darius stood by the window of the holding area, watching the parking lot with sharpened eyes. He could feel the shift before he could see it. There was something about the way the night held its breath, like the town itself knew something was coming. Sheriff Maddox stood across the room by the main desk, his hands on his hips, barking low commands to his deputies. But his voice wasn't as steady as it had been hours earlier. His shoulders were tighter, his jaw clenched a little too hard. Darius watched him carefully. Maddox was unraveling, trying to hold the image of control together with nothing but ego and fear. The first sign of the storm hit the station without a sound. A line of unmarked black SUVs rolled into the parking lot like silent predators. Their lights were off, but their presence was loud enough to make Maddox stop mid-sentence. He turned to the window, his face paling under the flickering overhead lights. Darius leaned forward, his pulse steady. This was it. The first door of the lead SUV swung open. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell stepped out, her dark suit sharp against the pale morning fog. She walked with purpose, her badge clipped visibly to her belt, a small tactical team moving in sync behind her. The rest of the SUVs emptied just as quickly, agents fanning out in precise formation. Maddox cursed under his breath, spinning toward the dispatcher. "Stay calm. Follow protocol," he snapped, though his voice cracked just enough for everyone to hear. The dispatcher didn't move. Neither did the deputies. All eyes were now on the growing wave of federal agents taking position outside. The front doors burst open without hesitation. Agent Mitchell walked in first, her team filling the lobby behind her. Maddox puffed up his chest, trying to meet her halfway like he still had control. "You're out of your jurisdiction, Agent," Maddox started, but Mitchell cut him off with a raised hand and a voice that froze the entire room. "Federal warrant," she announced loud enough for every ear to catch. "Effective immediately. This facility is under federal control. Step aside." Maddox tried to stand his ground, his fists clenched at his sides. "This is a local matter." "Not anymore," Mitchell snapped, producing a thick folder from under her arm. "We have authorization to seize all departmental records, electronic data, booking logs, and evidence related to arrests made over the past 5 years. Your department is now part of a federal corruption investigation." Darius watched as the agents moved with mechanical precision, securing exits, posting agents at every hallway. Computers were unplugged, hard drives boxed, filing cabinets cracked open. Maddox stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for words that wouldn't come. One of the deputies finally broke the silence, taking a slow step back toward the wall, hands raised slightly as if to show he wasn't getting in the way. One by one, the others followed, backing away from their posts like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Mitchell turned toward Maddox again, stepping closer until they were nearly face to face. "We know what you've been doing here. Sheriff, we have statements, we have records. You can make this easy, or you can make it worse. Your choice." Maddox's face twitched, but he didn't answer. He glanced toward the door like he was thinking about running, but Mitchell's team had already sealed every exit. "Sit down," Mitchell ordered coldly. Maddox's jaw clenched, but after a long beat, he finally lowered himself into the nearest chair, his head dropping into his hands. Mitchell turned toward the holding area. Darius was already standing, his expression unreadable. She nodded once toward the deputy closest to the cell door. The keys jingled as the lock turned, the door swinging open without a word. Darius stepped out slowly, stretching his arms, rolling his shoulders. He made eye contact with Mitchell, giving her a slight nod. She returned it without breaking stride. Maddox tried to stand again, but an agent placed a firm hand on his shoulder, forcing him back down. Darius walked past him without saying a word. He didn't need to. Maddox already knew. His game was over. But the players behind him, the ones who had built this machine, were still hiding in the shadows. And Darius wasn't done yet. The door to the back hallway opened, and standing there was Scott Yates, still holding his leather folder, still wearing that plastic lawyer's smile. Darius took a deep breath. It was time to face the man who thought he could turn injustice into paperwork. The lobby of the Mill Creek Police Department had never been this crowded. Every square foot was filled with federal agents, DOJ staff, camera crews, and reporters who had caught wind of the chaos overnight. Satellite trucks lined the street outside, their antennas reaching toward the pale morning sky. The quiet little town had just become national news. Darius stood off to the side, flanked by Special Agent Mitchell and 2 federal officers. He watched as Scott Yates stood near the front desk, trying to act like he still had control. The man hadn't expected this. His face said it all. Darius could see the strain in his posture, the forced smile he kept flashing at the cameras. Jordan arrived moments later, stepping through the front doors with the kind of presence that made people instinctively move out of his way. Darius felt a weight lift off his chest the second he saw his brother. For the first time since this nightmare started, someone in this building actually outranked the corruption. "You good?" Jordan asked as he approached, his voice low but firm. Darius nodded. "Better now." Agent Mitchell leaned in toward them. "We have enough to lock down the building, but this doesn't end here. They'll try to spin this." As if on cue, a local reporter, Riley Jenkins from Channel 7 News, pushed her way to the front of the growing crowd. She held a microphone in one hand and her phone in the other, streaming everything live on social media. "Attorney General Brooks, can you confirm the purpose of this raid?" she asked, her voice cutting through the noise. Jordan didn't step forward. Instead, he turned to Darius and gave a small nod. Darius knew exactly what that meant. His story, his voice, his moment. Darius stepped forward, clearing his throat just enough to command the room. "I was falsely arrested by this department," he began, his voice steady. "They planted evidence in my car. They fabricated a criminal record that doesn't exist. They've done this to others before me, and they would have done it again if not for the people standing behind me right now." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Riley leaned in closer. "Mr. Brooks, are you saying this department has been systematically targeting innocent people?" Darius didn't hesitate. "That's exactly what I'm saying. They've built the machine here, one that runs on false arrests, fabricated evidence, and ruined lives. But that machine just broke." The crowd pressed closer, phones held high, streaming every word. Scott Yates finally stepped forward, forcing his lawyer face back into place. "We are cooperating fully with the investigation," he announced loudly, trying to speak over Darius. "But I assure you, these accusations are still being reviewed. No official charges have been filed against this department. Darius turned to face him, taking a single step forward. "You tried to get me to plead guilty an hour ago," Darius said, his voice carrying across the room. "You told me no one beats this system. You're right about one thing. No one does. Until someone fights back." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Riley raised her phone higher, capturing every second. "Are you denying that you offered a plea deal to an innocent man, Mr. Yates?" she pressed. Yates opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face flushed deep red. He tried to speak again, but the pressure of the live stream and the stares of the federal agents closed in like a noose. Darius turned back to the cameras. "I'm not interested in deals," he said. "I want every victim's name cleared. I want every file opened, and I want this machine dismantled, starting today." The lobby erupted with noise, reporters shouting questions, agents coordinating, deputies trying to back away unnoticed. But Darius wasn't finished. He turned toward the officers still standing along the wall, the ones who hadn't spoken a word all night. He scanned their faces until he found one that looked different. Officer Greg Peters. Young, nervous, shifting on his feet like he wanted to disappear. Darius took a step toward him. "You've seen it, haven't you?" Darius asked, loud enough for the cameras to hear. "You know what they've been doing here." The room went quiet again. Peters froze, caught like a deer in headlights. His eyes flicked toward Yates, then back to Darius. For a moment, it looked like he might run, but then he stepped forward. Just one step, but enough for everyone to see. Greg Peters stood frozen in the middle of the crowded lobby, eyes darting between Darius, the cameras, and the other officers who now watched him like he was standing on a ledge. The noise in the room dimmed, replaced by a thick tension that clung to every breath. He shifted his weight, hands twitching at his sides. His throat worked like he was trying to force down a truth he wasn't ready to say out loud. Darius didn't move. He gave the young officer space, holding his gaze without pressure, without expectation, just leaving the door open for the man to step through it or not. The choice was his. Slowly, Peters licked his lips and took another shaky step forward. I've seen things," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of 1,000 unsaid words. "Things that aren't right." The room leaned in as if gravity had shifted toward him. Darius nodded once, encouraging but patient. "What kind of things?" "Officer Peters." Greg swallowed hard, glancing at the deputies still standing along the wall. None of them moved. None of them blinked. He turned back to Darius, dropping his voice, but not so low that the cameras couldn't catch it. "Quotas. We have quotas." The words hit the air like a brick through glass. Darius took a step closer, careful not to spook him. "Quotas for what?" Peters let out a shaky breath. "Arrests. Asset seizures. We have targets we're supposed to hit every month. If we don't, the brass say his funding gets cut, promotions get delayed, people get transferred to posts no one wants." Darius nodded again. "And the fabricated records?" Peters's face went pale. His voice dropped even lower. "There's a server, a restricted system only the sergeants and the sheriff can fully access. It stores backup records, alternate reports, fake files with fake charges and fake histories. It's where they build the paper trails to justify the arrests." Agent Mitchell pushed through the crowd, stepping up beside Darius. "Where's this server located?" Peters looked like he might be sick. He wiped his sweaty palms on his uniform pants, glancing again toward Maddox, who sat slumped in a chair, his face red and glistening with sweat. "There's a locked room in the basement," Peters whispered. "It's not on the official schematics. You need a second-level keycard to get in. Sheriff Maddox has one. So does Sergeant Hank." Mitchell turned to her team. "Secure that server now. I want that room locked down and forensics on site in 5 minutes." Agents moved instantly, pushing through the building like a tide of black suits and federal authority, but Darius wasn't finished with Peters. "Why now?" he asked, stepping closer. "Why tell the truth now when you've watched them do this for months?" Peters flinched like the question hit him physically. His face twisted into something between guilt and fear. I didn't know how bad it really was. I told myself it was just protocol, just paperwork. But when they started talking about you," his voice cracked again, but he pushed through it. "I heard them say you were going to be their biggest score. I heard them joke about how easy it was going to be to break you. And then I saw you stand there, calm, not folding like the others, and I knew I couldn't keep my mouth shut anymore." Darius nodded slowly. He could see the man trembling under the weight of what he was risking. "You're doing the right thing," Darius said quietly, "but you need to see this through, all the way." Peters nodded weakly, swallowing again. "I'll take you there," he whispered. "I'll show you the server." Mitchell turned, signaling her team to follow. Jackson appeared at Darius's side, his face unreadable, but his eyes locked on Peters like he was seeing the first crack in a dam that had held for years. The agents cleared a path as Peters led them through the back hallway, away from the cameras, away from the noise. The air grew heavier with every step. Darius could feel the walls tightening like the station itself didn't want to give up its secrets. But it was too late for that. This wasn't just about bringing down Maddox or Yates. This was about ripping the whole machine apart from the inside out. And Peters was the first piece to finally move. The door to the basement hallway groaned open, revealing a narrow staircase that seemed to drop into the bowels of the building. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint hum of machines could already be heard beneath the concrete walls. Peters led the way, his face pale but determined. Behind him, Agent Mitchell, Jackson, and 2 FBI technicians followed in tight formation. Darius stayed at the top of the stairs, watching their backs as they descended. He wasn't about to let anyone close the trap again. Peters reached the bottom first and turned toward a steel door with no visible markings. The small electronic lock glowed faintly red. "This is it," Peters whispered. "We call it the storage room, but no one except Maddox and Hank ever go inside. I've never been in there." Mitchell motioned to one of the techs, who stepped forward with a portable keypad override. Within seconds, the red light blinked green, and the lock disengaged with a loud metallic snap. The door creaked open slowly. The air inside was thick and stale, heavy with dust and old wiring. Racks of servers lined the walls, each one humming softly, tiny green lights blinking like a heartbeat. In the center of the room stood a single terminal with a large monitor, its screen locked behind a password prompt. "Get me in," Mitchell ordered. The second technician moved quickly, pulling out a portable device and plugging it into the terminal's USB port. Lines of code began to scroll across the screen as the bypass program did its work. Within seconds, the password screen disappeared, revealing a dashboard filled with file directories. The room fell silent as everyone leaned in. The first folder was labeled Arrest Logs, Active Cases. The second, Asset Seizure, Monthly Reports. But it was the third folder that stopped them cold. Demographic Targeting Protocols. Mitchell's jaw clenched. "Open it," she commanded. The tech clicked the folder, revealing spreadsheets, internal memos, and detailed lists of arrest patterns broken down by race, age, and economic status. Jackson leaned over the screen, his eyes narrowing. They were selecting targets based on profiles, not crimes. "They're not just arresting people," Mitchell added quietly. "They're hunting them." Peters swallowed hard, backing away like the air had been knocked out of him. I didn't know it was this bad." The tech kept digging deeper into the file structure. Another directory appeared beneath the targeting protocols. It was labeled Project Legacy. Mitchell and Jackson exchanged a quick glance. "Open that one too," Mitchell ordered. The folder expanded to reveal a presentation slide deck. The title read, "Project Legacy, Statewide Expansion Strategy." The first slide displayed a map with dozens of highlighted towns, all marked as potential expansion sites. The next slide outlined a detailed business model describing how to replicate Mill Creek's operation across the entire state, including private prison partnerships, judicial appointments, and quota systems. "They were scaling this," Jackson muttered. "Not just here, everywhere." Mitchell's face hardened. "Not anymore." She turned toward her team. "Shut this system down. Copy everything. We'll need full forensics." The agents moved quickly, pulling hard drives, securing data, and documenting every step. Peters stood frozen in the doorway, his breathing shallow. Darius stepped up beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing," Darius said quietly. Peters nodded weakly, but his face told a different story. He had just exposed the machine he had been a part of, and there was no going back. Mitchell tapped her radio. "Bring Sheriff Maddox and D.A. Yates to the holding room. They're under federal arrest." The agents upstairs moved fast. The walls of Mill Creek's empire were collapsing, and this time there would be no one left to hide behind. The Oak Ridge Tavern sat on the outskirts of Mill Creek, its flickering neon sign the only source of light on an otherwise empty road. It was the kind of place that rarely saw new faces, a quiet backroom haunt for men who wanted their conversations to stay in the dark. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and cheap whiskey. Sheriff Maddox hunched over a chipped wooden table near the back, flanked by D.A. Scott Yates, Judge Leonard Blackwood, and officers Rick Langley and Carl Decker. Empty glasses littered the table, the tension hanging over them heavier than the booze in their veins. "We need to lock this down," Yates whispered, leaning in. "The feds are tearing the station apart. If they flip Peters, it's over." Maddox ran a hand through his thinning hair, his face slick with sweat. "We can't let it get that far. We shut this down tonight." Blackwood slammed his glass down, his voice shaking. "How? They've already got the files. If Peters talks, we're done." Maddox leaned closer, lowering his voice to a near growl. "We do what we've always done. We clean house." Langley shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the bar's front window like he expected someone to be listening. "You're talking about taking out a federal witness." Maddox's eyes darkened. "I'm talking about survival. Peters disappears. The feds lose their leverage. No witness. No case." Yates leaned back, crossing his arms. "And what about Darius Brooks? You think he's going to roll over and let this die quietly?" Maddox cracked his knuckles. "He won't matter when the case collapses. Without Peters, they've got nothing solid. It's his word against ours." Decker rubbed the back of his neck. "We've never gone this far. Not like this." Maddox's lips curled into a bitter smirk. "You think the suicides just happened on their own?" The table went silent. Blackwood stared at Maddox, his face draining of color. "You're telling me those deaths?" Maddox leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Every one of them. You really thought all those men just hung themselves in Holden cells? Please." Decker looked like he might be sick. Langley stood abruptly, knocking over his glass. "You're insane. You're going to drag us all down with you?" Maddox stood too, grabbing Langley by the collar and pulling him close. "You were in this from the start. You planted the evidence. You filed the false reports. Don't act righteous now." What none of them noticed was the tiny wireless microphone tucked under the table, planted hours earlier by Special Agent Mitchell's team. Every word had been recorded. Outside, Mitchell and Jackson sat in an unmarked van parked across the street, headphones on, listening in real time. Mitchell leaned forward, her face hardening. "We've got enough," she whispered into her radio. "Move in now." The signal went out across the tactical channel. Within seconds, black SUVs and armored vans swarmed the bar's parking lot. Agents moved in like a silent wave, covering every exit before anyone inside even noticed. Back at the table, Maddox dropped Langley's collar as the sound of tires screeching outside shattered the silence. Langley's face twisted in panic. "What the hell is that?" Blackwood bolted from his chair, knocking over another glass. "They're here! They're here!" Maddox grabbed for the gun under his jacket, but the front door burst open before he could draw it. "Federal agents!" Mitchell's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Hands where we can see them." Yates tried to run toward the back door, but Jackson tackled him before he made it 2 steps. Decker put his hands up immediately, his face ghost white. Langley froze, shaking. Maddox stood alone, gun half drawn, his breathing ragged. "Don't be stupid, Maddox," Mitchell warned, her weapon leveled at his chest. "Put it down." Maddox's hand trembled. His eyes darted between the agents and his crew, realizing no one was backing him. Slowly, he let the gun drop to the floor and raised his hands. Mitchell stepped forward. "Cuffs, ready. Ray Maddox, Scott Yates, Leonard Blackwood, Rick Langley, Carl Decker. You're all under federal arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of civil rights violations." The bar's doors swung wider as more agents poured in, securing the scene. Mitchell glanced at Jackson. "We've got them, and we've got their confession on tape." Jackson nodded grimly. "This is bigger than we thought." Mitchell keyed her radio again. "Notify all task forces. We're expanding the operation to every county listed in Project Legacy." The machine had just started to fall apart, one arrest at a time. The old town hall of Mill Creek had been transformed overnight into a federal command center. Cables ran along the floor, monitors lined the walls, and a steady stream of agents moved between makeshift workstations, securing evidence from the largest police corruption raid the state had ever seen. Darius stood off to the side with Jordan, both watching the controlled chaos unfold. On one screen, live surveillance feeds from nearby counties showed federal teams raiding sheriff's offices and seizing records. On another, agents combed through hundreds of digital files recovered from the secret server downstairs. Mitchell leaned over one of the desks, her expression sharp as she scrolled through spreadsheets and internal memos. Jackson stood next to her, arms crossed, jaw tight. Peters hovered behind them, pale but steady, his eyes darting nervously as agents walked past. "It's bigger than just Mill Creek," Mitchell muttered, dragging a folder to the center of the screen. The heading read, "Demographic Resource Management, Regional Network Strategy." Beneath it, a map displayed 37 towns across 3 states, each marked with a red dot. Jordan leaned in, scanning the map. "How many of these are confirmed?" Mitchell nodded toward an agent standing nearby. The young woman stepped forward, flipping open a tablet. "We've already moved on 6 locations. Same patterns in every one. False arrests, asset seizures, fabricated records, all feeding into the same private prison network." Jackson clenched his fists. They were building an empire. Mitchell's jaw tightened, and they were just getting started. "Look at this." She pulled up another document, this one labeled Project Legacy, Expansion Timeline. The timeline projected growth over the next 5 years, expanding the network into 5 additional states. They had a blueprint, she added. Every town on this list was scheduled for rollout. Jordan exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Who signed off on this?" Mitchell tapped her screen, opening a folder labeled Legislative Partnerships. Dozens of emails appeared, all referencing a single name, Senator Robert Phillips. Jordan's face hardened. "Of course," he muttered. "He's been pushing private prison contracts for years." Jackson leaned over the desk, scanning the headers. "These emails, they aren't just endorsements. He's given direct approval, naming judges, approving funding channels. He's running this thing from the top." Peters stepped closer, his voice trembling slightly. "He visited the station once, a year ago, said it was a routine check-in with the sheriff's office, but Maddox acted different that day. Nervous, like the senator was more than just a politician." Mitchell nodded. "He wasn't visiting, he was managing the operation." Jordan straightened, pulling out his phone. "Get me a secure line to the DOJ. We're taking him down tonight." The room buzzed with activity as agents prepared for the next wave. Helicopter rotors began to hum in the distance, and unmarked SUVs lined up outside the building. Mitchell turned to Peters. "You've done your part, but this next step is going to make waves a lot bigger than Mill Creek. You sure you're ready for that?" Peters swallowed hard but nodded. "I've lived with what I've seen long enough. It's time to finish this." Jordan finished his call and turned back to the team. "The warrant's in motion. We move on Senator Phillips at first light." Mitchell leaned in, lowering her voice. "We're not just chasing dirty cops anymore. We're going after a sitting U.S. Senator." Jordan's expression didn't waver. "And we're going to bring him down." The team nodded in silent agreement. The command center buzzed louder than ever. But Jordan's next words cut through it all. "He built this network," he said quietly, "and we're going to dismantle it, piece by piece." The private jet sat on the far end of the tarmac at Reagan National Airport, its engines already humming quietly in the pre-dawn light. Inside the VIP lounge, Senator Robert Phillips stood by the window with a phone pressed to his ear, his free hand shaking slightly as he watched ground crews prepare the aircraft. He wore the same polished image he had built for decades: tailored navy suit, perfectly knotted tie, leather briefcase at his side, but the sweat on his brow and the tightness in his jaw betrayed what that image couldn't hide. His voice was low and sharp as he spoke into the phone. "I told you to contain this. How the hell did they get this far?" Whoever was on the other end answered in rushed tones, but Phillips wasn't listening. His eyes kept darting toward the exit. Wheels up in 10, he muttered. "If anyone asks, I'm attending an emergency security conference in Zurich." He ended the call and stuffed the phone into his briefcase. His driver stood nearby, shifting nervously as if he knew something wasn't right. Phillips didn't speak to him. He didn't need to. The man had been paid to keep his mouth shut and follow instructions. Nothing more. He walked toward the private gate, flashing his diplomatic credentials to the attendant who barely glanced up before waving him through. Phillips allowed himself a small breath of relief as he stepped onto the tarmac, moving toward the waiting jet. The stairs lowered with a mechanical whine, the door cracking open. He climbed quickly, refusing to look back, but before he could step inside, the shout rang out behind him. "Federal agents, step away from the aircraft." Phillips froze mid-step. Slowly, he turned to see 4 black SUVs skidding to a stop on the tarmac, FBI agents pouring out with weapons drawn. At their lead stood Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, her badge raised high. "Robert Phillips, you are under federal arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and obstruction of justice." For a split second, Phillips considered running. His eyes darted toward the cockpit, toward the jet, but the pilot was already stepping back, hands raised, making it clear no one was about to save him. Phillips' shoulders sagged as he slowly raised his hands. "You're making a mistake," he called out, trying to sound in control, but his voice cracked on the last word. Mitchell approached, her team flanking her. "Turn around. Hands on your head." Phillips obeyed, grinding his teeth as they cuffed his wrists behind his back. His briefcase hit the ground with a dull thud, papers spilling out onto the tarmac. Mitchell leaned in close, her voice cold. You're not running from this." Phillips let out a bitter laugh. "You have no idea what you're touching. You think I'm the top of this?" Mitchell didn't flinch. "We'll find out soon enough." They marched him back toward the SUVs, his career unraveling with every step. But before they loaded him into the vehicle, Phillips turned his head slightly. "I want a deal," he hissed through clenched teeth. Mitchell narrowed her eyes. "A deal for what?" Phillips leaned closer, lowering his voice. "The board. You're wasting your time with me. I'm just a gatekeeper. They're the ones who built this. You want the truth? I can give it to you. All of it." Mitchell's jaw tightened, her mind racing. She nodded toward her team. "Get him in the car. We'll talk at the field office." As the SUVs pulled away from the tarmac, Mitchell pulled out her phone. "Tell the cyber team to prioritize the encrypted files from Mill Creek. If Phillips is telling the truth, those emails are our map to the real architects of this machine." The hunt had just escalated. The senator had fallen, but the real power still lurked in the shadows. The temporary FBI data center inside Mill Creek's old town hall looked more like a tech startup than a federal command post. Rows of laptops, servers, and monitors blinked under fluorescent lights. Digital forensic teams worked in shifts, drinking stale coffee and typing furiously as they combed through thousands of files seized from the sheriff's department, the DA's office, and now Senator Phillips' confiscated devices. But the real prize sat on a single isolated terminal at the far end of the room, an encrypted data dump recovered from the hidden server Peters had helped them find. Mitchell stood over it with Jackson and Peters flanking her. The screen displayed nothing but a locked login screen labeled Project Legacy, Admin Access Only. The FBI's top cyber techs had been hammering at it for hours with no success. Peters shifted nervously beside her. "If we can't break this, all of this could die in here," he whispered. Mitchell didn't answer. She stared at the clock ticking on the screen, frustration tightening her jaw. Jackson leaned over the keyboard. "We've tried every bypass in the book. Whoever built this knew exactly how to bury their tracks." Just as the room seemed to settle into hopeless silence, a message suddenly flashed across the locked terminal. "Need help?" Mitchell's eyes widened. "Who the hell?" The message blinked again. "I can get you in." Mitchell's hand shot to her earpiece. "Who's logged into this system?" The tech closest to her shook his head. "No one on our end. Ma'am, the system's isolated. This has to be external." Another message appeared. "Call me Ghost." Peters leaned in, his face pale. "Who the hell is Ghost?" Mitchell didn't blink. "Somebody we just became very interested in." Another line appeared on the screen. "You want the board? I have the keys." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Is this a trap?" Mitchell didn't hesitate. She typed a response. "Prove it." The screen flickered. A new window opened, revealing lines of raw data streaming faster than the human eye could process. Within seconds, folders unlocked themselves one by one. Project Legacy, Demographic Targeting, Financial Flows. The last folder made Mitchell's blood run cold. Nationwide Expansion, 50-state blueprint. Jackson cursed under his breath as the team gathered around the screen. They clicked into the expansion file, revealing a detailed business plan stretching across all 50 states. Each file outlined county-by-county rollouts, targeting minority populations under the guise of public safety initiatives. It wasn't just a regional scam, it was a national industry. They had built a machine to industrialize incarceration. Peters took a step back, his face ashen. "My God, they're scaling this across the entire country." The screen flashed again. "I've been inside their system for months. They think they're invisible. They're not." Mitchell's heart pounded. She typed quickly. "Why help us?" The response came in seconds. "Because I was one of them. Because I built the system they're using. Because I know how to destroy it." Jackson leaned over Mitchell's shoulder. "This feels real. Too real." Mitchell nodded. "Get me everything Ghost just unlocked. Every file, every transaction, every name." The techs scrambled to copy the data. Another message flashed. "This goes higher than Phillips, higher than the board. They're building an industry. Slavery 2.0. Mitchell clenched her fists. "Not on my watch." Just then, a woman pushed through the doors of the data center flashing press credentials. Her voice cut through the hum of the room. "My name is Valerie Cruz. I'm with the National Observer. I've been following this case since day one, and I have information you need." Mitchell exchanged a sharp look with Jackson. The media had just entered the war room, and the stakes had never been higher. The hum of the makeshift FBI command post quieted the moment Valerie Cruz entered the room. She carried herself like someone who had already been burned by this story once and wasn't planning to let it happen again. Mitchell watched as the reporters scanned the faces around her, her eyes locking on Jordan Brooks almost immediately. "You're the one who cracked this open," Valerie said quietly, her voice cutting through the low buzz of agents moving between workstations. Jordan nodded but didn't invite her closer. "What do you have?" Valerie took another step forward, lowering her voice. "I was here 2 years ago, investigating Mill Creek. I had sources inside the courthouse. A whistleblower who claimed judges were being paid off to push guilty verdicts on out-of-town defendants." Mitchell crossed her arms. "What happened to your story?" Valerie's jaw tightened. "It was killed. My editor got a visit from someone connected to Senator Phillips' office. The story disappeared overnight, and so did my source." Jackson stepped closer, studying her. "You're here now because—" Valerie reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Because I kept something. A backup of the interview my source gave me before he disappeared. A judge, Leonard Blackwood." Mitchell's eyes narrowed as she motioned for Valerie to continue. Valerie pressed play. The room fell silent as the old recording crackled to life. Blackwood's voice filled the air, lower than they remembered, but unmistakable. "It's not just the police. We have monthly targets. We push for convictions on travelers, mostly minorities. The money comes through a shell company linked to Regional Resource Management. We're told it's all legal, but we know it's not. We know." The recording clicked off, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Valerie leaned in. "I tried to go public back then. No one listened. But now you have the files, the arrests, the senator. You have what I didn't." Mitchell exchanged a glance with Jordan. "She just handed us the missing link." Jordan nodded slowly. "We can prove this goes all the way to the prison corporations." Valerie didn't smile. "You'll need to move fast. My sources tell me the companies are already clearing out offices across the state, shredding documents, scrubbing servers." Mitchell turned to her team. "Prep the warrants. We hit every office tied to Regional Resource Management and their shell companies. No warning, no delays." The agents scattered into action. Valerie watched them go, then turned back to Mitchell. "I want one thing," she said quietly. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Name it." Valerie's voice didn't waver. "I ride with you. Full access. No more silencing the truth." Mitchell held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "You're in." The operation had just escalated again, and this time, the media wasn't knocking on the door. They were walking through it. The downtown headquarters of Regional Correctional Services stood like a glass fortress in the heart of the city, its mirrored windows reflecting the early morning sun. Inside, employees moved like clockwork through sleek hallways and polished lobbies, unaware that within minutes their world was about to collapse. Across the street, a fleet of unmarked black SUVs and armored vans lined up in silence. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell stood at the front, flanked by Jordan Brooks, Agent Jackson, and Valerie Cruz, who held her camera steady, documenting every second. We have federal seizure warrants for all documents, servers, and financial records. Mitchell briefed her team one last time. No one in or out until we lock this place down. Jordan checked his phone one last time. DOJ confirmed the legal teams are standing by. If they try to block us, push through, we've got judicial clearance on our side. Mitchell nodded, then signaled her lead agents. Move. The agents advanced in waves, storming the front lobby with badges raised and voices commanding authority. Employees froze mid-step, wide-eyed and confused. A receptionist dropped her phone as agents surrounded the front desk. Mitchell stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. This building is under federal investigation. Step away from your workstations. Hands where we can see them. Upstairs, Thomas Blackwell, the CEO of Regional Correctional Services, stood in front of his office window, watching the invasion unfold. His jaw clenched as he turned to his chief legal officer. How did they get here this fast? The lawyer paled. Senator Phillips must have flipped. Blackwell's face darkened. Initiate Protocol 0. Now. But before the lawyer could move, the office door burst open. Mitchell entered with her team, guns holstered but hands ready. Thomas Blackwell, she announced, you're under federal investigation for conspiracy, racketeering, and civil rights violations. Blackwell raised his hand slowly, trying to control his breathing. You're making a mistake. This is a private company. You have no jurisdiction here. Mitchell didn't blink. We have jurisdiction over every citizen in this country, and you've been profiting off the backs of thousands of them. Agents pushed past him, seizing files, shutting down servers, and boxing up evidence. Jackson dropped a stack of printed reports onto Blackwell's desk, flipping them open one by one. Revenue reports from your private prison contracts, projected earnings based on arrest quotas, demographic breakdowns targeting Black and Latino prisoners. Valerie's camera captured every page. Blackwell's facade cracked as he lunged toward the papers, but Mitchell stepped between them. Sit down, she ordered coldly. You're done. Blackwell sank into his leather chair, his face draining of color. You don't understand. This goes way higher than me. I just run the logistics. Mitchell leaned in. Then start talking, because the only thing saving you now is how much you give us on the people above you. Suddenly, one of the cyber agents monitoring live data feeds from the server room shouted across the floor, We just intercepted a signal. Encrypted call tagged as Protocol 0. Mitchell spun toward the agent. Trace it now. The agents moved into overdrive. Blackwell's face turned to stone. He knew what was coming next. Protocol 0 wasn't just a cleanup. It was designed to erase everything. And if the FBI didn't stop it in time, the real power players behind this empire would vanish without a trace. The atmosphere inside the FBI's temporary command post in Mill Creek had shifted from tense to electric. Evidence boxes stacked higher by the hour. More names added to the growing list of federal targets. The case was bigger than anyone had imagined, and the agents knew they were closing in. But they also knew the people behind this machine wouldn't go down quietly. Lisa Parker sat alone in one of the secured interview rooms, nervously twisting a plastic water bottle in her hands. As former assistant to DA Scott Yates, she knew more than anyone about how deep this corruption ran. She had lived inside the machine for years, filing paperwork, processing fabricated reports, and handling sealed documents that had never belonged in any official record. She knew the names. She knew the accounts. She knew exactly how they kept the money flowing without leaving a trail, and that made her dangerous. Through the one-way glass, Agent Mitchell and Agent Jackson watched as Lisa stared at the floor, clearly wrestling with whether to speak or keep protecting herself. Mitchell leaned toward her radio. Has her security detail been doubled? An agent's voice crackled back. Affirmative. 2 armed agents outside the door. 2 more on the perimeter. Mitchell nodded, but something still felt off. They had seen this pattern before. Someone always tried to silence the people who knew too much. And Lisa Parker was the last thread connecting this case to the highest levels of power. Across the room, Valerie Cruz was reviewing footage from the earlier corporate raid when the door opened, and a correctional officer from the local detention facility stepped in, flashing department credentials. He carried a clipboard and wore a neutral expression, blending in like he belonged. Mitchell barely glanced up. Transfers and witness protections happened all the time. The officer leaned toward the agents outside Lisa's door. Parker's being relocated, he said quietly. Federal directive just came in. One of the agents frowned. We weren't notified. The officer nodded toward his clipboard. Came straight from the top. You want to check with command? Go ahead, but I've got the paperwork right here. The agent reached for the clipboard. That's when the officer moved, fast. His hand slipped inside his jacket, pulling a small injector pen, military grade, silent, fast-acting, lethal. He pushed toward the door, shoving the agents aside. Inside the interview room, Lisa barely had time to register the commotion before the door flew open. But before the attacker could reach her, Agent Jackson crashed through the hallway with Mitchell on his heels. Down! Jackson shouted. He tackled the assassin just as the needle jabbed the air inches from Lisa's neck. The syringe flew from the man's hand as Jackson drove him to the ground. Mitchell had her weapon drawn in an instant, pressing it to the back of the man's head. Do not move, she barked. The agent secured the attacker, flipping him onto his back, his face twisted into a cold grin, as if he had expected to fail but didn't care. You have no idea who you're up against, he whispered. Mitchell leaned closer. We do now. Lisa sat frozen in her chair, her face pale, hands shaking. Jackson crouched beside her. You're safe now, but we need you to tell us everything. Lisa swallowed hard, then nodded. All right, she whispered. I'll tell you everything. Over the next 2 hours, Lisa revealed how the district attorney's office had been coordinating with private prison executives, creating shell companies to launder millions through offshore accounts. She named judges, politicians, law firms, and international banks. She explained how they used asset seizures to funnel cash through legitimate-looking charities and development funds. And she described in chilling detail how anyone who asked too many questions simply disappeared. Mitchell listened in grim silence, knowing they had just unlocked the next level of this case. The assassin hadn't just failed to silence Lisa Parker, he had triggered the one thing they feared most, her voice. As agents processed the scene, the cyber team called Mitchell over. We finished tracing the Protocol Zero signal, the tech reported. It's bigger than we thought. We're looking at a full-scale international laundering network. Mitchell exhaled slowly. Then, we're not done yet. Prep the team. We move on the money next. The machine was collapsing, but its roots stretched across the world. And now, the real hunt was just beginning. Inside the Department of Justice's Financial Crimes Analysis Division in Washington, D.C., the walls were lined with digital maps, charts, and real-time transaction logs. Agents and financial analysts worked side by side, tracking lines of data stretching across continents. Every movement of money, every suspicious account, every hidden wire transfer was being pulled from the shadows into the light. Jordan Brooks stood at the center of the operation, arms crossed as he watched the data flow across massive display screens. Mitchell stood beside him, her face tight with focus as she listened to the lead analyst explain what they had uncovered. We've identified 3 primary offshore hubs, the analyst began. Dubai, Singapore, and the Cayman Islands. All three are used to cycle funds through layers of shell corporations, eventually landing in accounts owned by regional correctional services and their affiliates. Jordan leaned in. How much have they moved? The analyst typed rapidly, pulling up a breakdown. Over $600 million in the last 5 years, with another $200 million flagged as suspicious but unconfirmed. Mitchell let out a slow breath. And what about domestic transfers? The analyst nodded, flipping to another screen. We're seeing direct payments to political action committees, legal consultant firms, and even judicial campaign funds, all funneled through dummy corporations that trace back to the same network. Jordan's jaw tightened. And the link to Project Legacy? The analyst pulled up another file labeled Project Legacy. Funding streams. The screen displayed a complex web of transactions, all originating from the same offshore accounts and feeding into multiple state-level initiatives disguised as community policing grants. Mitchell leaned closer. They're laundering money through government programs. Exactly, the analyst confirmed. They created legitimate-looking public safety initiatives, then funneled that money back into the private prison system through inflated contracts and manufactured service agreements. Jackson joined them, shaking his head in disbelief. They didn't just build a prison industry, they built an entire economy on the back of false arrests and racial targeting. Jordan turned toward the operations coordinator. What's our exposure window? The coordinator tapped her earpiece. We've got a private jet filed for departure from Dulles in 30 minutes, registered to a shell company linked to Regional Correctional Services. Passenger list is sealed. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. It's them. They're trying to run. Jordan didn't hesitate. Lock down that airport. No one leaves this country tonight. The team scrambled into action. The money trail had led them across the globe, but it was about to bring their biggest targets back within reach. The machine thought it could buy its way to freedom, but it had underestimated the one thing it couldn't erase: the trail of money leading straight to its door. The private hangar on the far side of Chicago's Midway Airport buzzed with unusual activity just after midnight. A sleek Gulfstream G700 idled on the tarmac, its engines already warmed, ready to disappear into the sky. Inside the hangar's security office, federal agents watched silently as the manifest updated on their screen. Thomas Blackwell's name sat at the top. The CEO of Regional Correctional Services had slipped out of D.C. hours earlier, avoiding every checkpoint the FBI had set up along the East Coast. But Chicago was the end of the line. Jordan Brooks stood with Mitchell just outside the security office. Both dressed in dark tactical gear, Jackson stood nearby, radio in hand, coordinating the takedown team positioned around the runway. Mitchell glanced at her watch. Any confirmation on where he's headed? An analyst responded over comms. Filed destination is Luxembourg, but there's a secondary flight plan logged in Singapore's clearance system. He's moving the rest of the money offshore. Jackson lowered his radio. He's not getting off the ground. The team moved into position as a black SUV rolled onto the tarmac. Blackwell stepped out, flanked by two personal security contractors. He wore the same tailored arrogance they had seen in every courtroom photo, but tonight it was thinner, more desperate. He adjusted his cufflinks as he strode toward the jet, never once looking back. Mitchell signaled the agents to wait until Blackwell reached the base of the aircraft stairs. The moment his foot hit the first step, floodlights roared to life, blinding the team on the runway. "Federal agents!" Jackson's voice echoed across the tarmac. "Step away from the aircraft. Hands where we can see them." Blackwell froze mid-step, his body going rigid. His security team spun around, reaching for their radios, but agents closed in before they could move. Mitchell led the charge, her voice sharp. "Thomas Blackwell, you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and human rights violations. Blackwell slowly turned, raising his hands. "I demand to speak to someone in the White House," he called back. "This is bigger than you know. I'm prepared to negotiate. Government level." Mitchell didn't blink. "There's nothing left to negotiate. You've already lost." Blackwell's jaw twitched as agents closed in, cuffing his wrists. "You don't get it," he snapped. "We built this with federal partnerships. You think you can touch us without taking down half of Washington with us?" Jordan stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "We're counting on it." Blackwell glared as they led him away from the jet, shouting over his shoulder, "This isn't over. You're not ready for the names I have. You're not ready for how deep this goes." Mitchell watched as Blackwell was loaded into a black SUV and driven off the tarmac. She turned to Jackson. "Get me the latest from the Judicial Task Force. I want the full list of judges who signed off on Project Legacy." Jackson nodded, already pulling up the report. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "It's time to finish what we started." The CEO had fallen, but the real power, the people who wore robes instead of suits, were next. The marble halls of the federal courthouse in downtown Washington, D.C. had never felt heavier. Normally, a place where justice was argued, shaped, and delivered. Today, it had become the scene of a reckoning that would shake the foundation of the entire judicial system. Jordan Brooks stood at the base of the courthouse steps, reading over the final list in his hand. 12 names, 12 judges, 12 guardians of the law who had sold their integrity for profit. Standing beside him, Mitchell checked her watch while Jackson coordinated the simultaneous execution of the warrants. Across the city, federal teams were already in motion, agents stationed outside homes, offices, and chambers waited for the signal to move. Jordan looked up at the reporters gathering in the distance, their cameras already rolling, sensing something historic was about to unfold. He turned to Mitchell. "It's time." Mitchell nodded once, then pressed her radio. "Execute." At that moment, agents across the city made their move. One by one, federal marshals entered courthouses, private offices, and even live judicial sessions. Some judges were pulled from their chambers in stunned silence. Others protested loudly, declaring their innocence, threatening lawsuits. But none fought harder than Judge Leonard "Lenny" Porter, the man the public had long praised as a symbol of fair justice. A black man who had built his career on civil rights rulings. Porter had stood on stages across the country preaching equality and reform. His face had graced magazines. His speeches had inspired law students. His name had become synonymous with integrity. But behind closed doors, Porter had been one of the system's most valuable assets, approving illegal plea deals, inflating sentencing guidelines, and greenlighting asset seizures that funneled millions back into the hands of private prison executives. When federal agents entered his chambers, Porter stood slowly, straightening his black robe. "This is a mistake," he said quietly, raising his hands. "You don't know what you're doing." Mitchell approached him herself, her voice steady but cold. "We know exactly what we're doing. Judge Porter, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and obstruction of justice." Porter's jaw clenched. "You're destroying faith in the system." Mitchell didn't flinch. "You already did that." As Porter was led away in handcuffs, reporters outside erupted in chaos. Some shouted questions. Others stood in stunned silence as camera flashes lit up the marble steps. Valerie Cruz stood at the front of the media line, her microphone trembling slightly in her hand. She leaned toward her cameraman. "Get this, every second, across the city, the other 11 judges were processed in similar fashion. Some hung their heads in shame. Others wore masks of defiance. But all were now officially federal defendants in the largest judicial corruption case in American history." Jordan watched the arrests unfold on the courthouse monitors. His face was unreadable, his posture rigid. Mitchell stood beside him, lowering her voice. "We just shook the justice system to its core." Jordan nodded slowly. "And now, the whole country is watching." He turned toward the main exit, straightening his tie. "Prep the briefing room. I'm ready to address the nation." The judges had fallen. The machine had been exposed. But the real battle, winning back public trust, was just beginning. The press briefing room at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., had never been this full. Reporters from every major network in the country filled the rows, their cameras trained on the podium where the United States Attorney General was scheduled to speak. Among the media were representatives from international outlets, BBC, Al Jazeera, Reuters, NHK, all eager to broadcast what was now being called the largest judicial corruption case in American history. Darius Brooks stood off to the side, watching the energy build like a slow-moving wave. He adjusted his cufflinks, silently amazed at how a single traffic stop had led to this moment. Across the room, Valerie Cruz gave him a subtle nod. She had earned her place here too. None of them had imagined it would grow this big or reach this far, but they had all played their part in exposing it. When Jordan Brooks finally stepped onto the stage, the room went silent. He stood tall behind the podium, eyes scanning the sea of cameras and journalists. He didn't need notes. The gravity of what he was about to say was already etched in his mind. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady. "Over the past several months, federal agents have uncovered and dismantled a criminal enterprise operating within our justice system. This scheme targeted thousands of innocent Americans, predominantly people of color, for profit." Flashes from cameras lit up the room as Jordan continued. "We have arrested 12 sitting judges, multiple senior law enforcement officials, and the executive leadership of Regional Correctional Services, one of the nation's largest private prison contractors. We have seized hundreds of millions of dollars in illicit assets and uncovered evidence of a nationwide network designed to turn human lives into revenue streams." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jordan held up a stack of official documents. "Let me be clear. This investigation is not over. Our work has only just begun. We are expanding our probe into additional states and federal agencies. No one, regardless of their position or power, is above the law." A reporter stood, voice raised. "Is it true Senator Robert Phillips has agreed to cooperate?" Jordan nodded solemnly. "Earlier today, Senator Phillips entered a guilty plea in federal court. In his sworn statement, he admitted to orchestrating judicial appointments and protecting this scheme for over a decade. His cooperation is ongoing and will be used to ensure that every architect of this operation is held accountable." The room erupted and shouted questions, but Jordan raised a hand, silencing them. "We owe it to every citizen harmed by this system to rebuild trust. We will not stop until every corner of this corruption is exposed." As Jordan stepped away from the podium, the cameras followed his every move. Darius caught his brother's eye as he exited the stage. They both knew this wasn't closure. It was just the first step toward real accountability. Moments later, as Darius checked his phone, a new message appeared on the screen. No number, no name, just 5 chilling words. "The board is not done." Darius stared at the screen, jaw tightening. The machine had fallen, but its architects were still out there. The skyline of Atlanta stretched beyond Darius Brooks's office window, glowing in the soft gold of the setting sun. But Darius didn't see any of it. He stood silently at his desk, staring at the 5 chilling words still glowing on his phone screen. "The board is not done." It wasn't a random threat. It wasn't just words. It was a message designed to remind him that the real architects, the ones who had stayed hidden while the system collapsed around them, were still watching. And they were still dangerous. Jordan Brooks leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, reading the tension on his brother's face. "How long has it been sitting there?" he asked quietly. Darius didn't move. 5 minutes, maybe longer, doesn't matter. Jackson paced near the bookshelves, glancing over his shoulder toward the large security monitors mounted on the wall. Live feeds from the building's exterior showed black SUVs arriving, agents stepping out with purpose. Backup had arrived, but Darius knew it wouldn't be enough to stop what was really coming. Jackson ran a hand over his beard. "They waited until you stood on the national stage before they moved. They want you to feel exposed, like you're next." Darius finally lowered the phone to the table, his knuckles tightening around the edge. "They want me to feel small, like they're still holding all the cards." He looked up, eyes sharp, but they just showed me they're scared. Jordan pushed off the doorframe and stepped closer. "You think this is panic?" Darius nodded. "If they still had control, they'd stay silent. They'd let the machine rebuild quietly while the public moved on. But this is loud. This is sloppy." Jackson grabbed the burner phone off the desk and slid it into a forensic bag. "We can trace the relay points, but you already know the truth? This isn't about Mill Creek anymore." Darius nodded again. "No, this goes all the way to the top. The law firm in D.C., they're the real engine. They move the money. They mask the political connections. They buried every thread that led back to the board." Jordan checked his watch, then turned to face them both. "The Bureau is already prepping a warrant, but they're nervous. That firm's protected by layers of legal shields, government ties. They'll fight us harder than anyone we've taken down so far." Darius walked to the window, looking out over the city as if searching for the right words. "We've exposed the cops, the judges, the politicians, but the people who built this machine, they're still untouched. If we stop now, we let them write the next chapter. We let them start over in another town, with another name." Jackson stepped closer. "You don't have to carry this, Darius. You already won. You burned their whole operation to the ground. You've got nothing left to prove." Darius turned, his voice steady but burning. "It was never about proving anything. It was about making sure no one else has to go through what we did, what all those families did." Jordan exchanged a long look with Jackson. Both men knew what Darius was really saying. They weren't done, not even close. Jordan grabbed the encrypted laptop off the table and pulled up the latest intelligence report. "The law firm's name keeps showing up on the back end of every major transaction we've uncovered. Shell companies, fake nonprofits, offshore accounts, every single dollar passed through them at some point." He clicked to another file. "And now, we've got proof they tried to wipe our servers during the Mill Creek takedown. They tried to bury the evidence before we got this far." Darius clenched his fists. "Then, they know we're coming." Jackson nodded. "That's why they're pushing back now. This is the last move they can make before we hit them." Jordan leaned forward, pulling up surveillance images. "We've already got eyes on their D.C. headquarters. Teams are staged a block away. They're moving files tonight. Hard drives, paper ledgers. It's all leaving the building before sunrise if we don't act." Mitchell's voice crackled over Jordan's secure phone line. "We've got a window. 90 minutes before the trucks roll. You give the word, we hit them tonight." Jordan looked to Darius. "This is your call." Darius didn't hesitate. "Do it." Jackson grabbed his jacket, already moving toward the door. "I'll coordinate on site. We're going to need full tactical." Jordan followed, pausing just long enough to look back at Darius. "You sure about this? Because once we cross this line, there's no walking it back." Darius stared at the phone on the table one last time, the weight of everything they had built crashing down on this moment. "We didn't come this far to stop now." Jordan nodded, then disappeared into the hallway. Darius grabbed his coat and followed. The board had played its final card. Now it was their turn, and they were going straight for the heart of the machine. The headquarters of Branson, Locke, and Tate, stood like a fortress in the heart of Washington, D.C. From the outside, it was just another glass and steel corporate monument to power, a place where billion-dollar deals were negotiated in silence. But to the team standing outside in the freezing January night, it was the heartbeat of the machine they had been chasing. The glass doors slid open with a mechanical hiss as Special Agent Sarah Mitchell stepped inside, flanked by Agent Jackson, a cyber forensics team, and 2 armed tactical units. They had secured every necessary warrant. They had confirmation that the firm's executive team had cleared the building hours ago under the pretense of a security drill. But Mitchell knew better. They were running. Jackson stayed close, scanning every shadow of the pristine marble lobby. "Any movement on the upper floors?" he asked into his earpiece. "Negative," the team leader replied. "All exits secured, elevators locked, stairwells covered." Mitchell nodded. "No one goes in or out until we have it all." At the far end of the lobby, in front of a locked security terminal, stood a man in a black hoodie. No badge, no name, just a laptop wired into the building's core systems. His code name was Ghost. He was the only reason they even had a shot at cracking what lay inside. Mitchell approached him quietly. "Tell me you're close." Ghost didn't look up. "Closer than they want me to be." Jackson leaned over to see his screen. Lines of code scrolled faster than the eye could follow. "You said they'd be ready for us." Ghost nodded. "Oh, they were triple encryption, hidden server layers, live data purge countdown already running." Mitchell's jaw clenched. "How long?" Ghost tapped a few keys. 57 minutes. After that, every record tied to Project Legacy self-deletes. No recovery, no backup. Jackson cursed under his breath. They knew we'd come. Ghost leaned forward, eyes narrowing as his fingers danced across the keyboard. "And they built this like Fort Knox, but they didn't build it for me." The cyber team worked alongside him, mirroring every file they could touch. But the real prize was deeper, hidden behind layers of digital armor labeled Master Admin Only. Ghost didn't flinch. Every system they had breached until now had used some version of this firm's architecture. This was the blueprint, the origin. He had studied it for weeks. He knew its weaknesses, and now he was tearing it apart. The timer in the corner of his screen ticked down to 50 minutes. Mitchell paced behind him, her hand tightening around her radio. "Are you sure this is the right move?" she whispered to Jackson. Jackson nodded. "We've followed the money this far. It all leads here." Ghost's voice cut through the tension. "I'm in." The terminal unlocked with a loud electronic click. One by one, the files began appearing on the mirrored displays. Legal contracts, shell corporation registries, payment chains leading to political action committees. Mitchell leaned in, reading the screen as her stomach tightened. This isn't just the money, this is the network. Ghost clicked deeper into a directory labeled Executive Operations. Inside, a single encrypted folder sat at the top of the list, the board. Mitchell's breath caught. "That's it." Jackson moved closer. "Can you open it?" Ghost cracked his knuckles and began the final breach. Encryption walls dropped layer by layer, each one more advanced than the last. But Ghost was faster, smarter. This was personal. After nearly 2 years of watching from the outside, he was about to see the core of the system for himself. Finally, with just 32 minutes left on the purge clock, the folder unlocked. Names, dozens of them, powerful people who operated far beyond the reach of law enforcement, billionaires, senators, CEOs of defense contractors, foreign investors with ties to global energy markets, every one of them a shareholder in Project Legacy. Mitchell scrolled through the list, her pulse pounding. They turned the justice system into a corporate asset portfolio. Ghost pulled up the financial ledgers, every dollar they've laundered, every offshore account, every payment to judges, law firms, and political campaigns. Jackson's face darkened as he read the entries. They've been running this for decades. Mitchell nodded grimly. And no one ever touched them because no one ever had this. Ghost leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. You do now. Mitchell turned to the team. Secure every file, triple encrypt, move it to the DOJ server in real time. The tech team moved instantly, their fingers flying across keyboards as hard drives were cloned, network logs were mirrored, and metadata was preserved for forensic analysis. But there was one more file, a document marked Master Ledger. Ghost hesitated before opening it. You should see this yourself. Mitchell leaned over as the ledger loaded. It was a complete breakdown of every operation tied to the board, names of contractors, lists of law enforcement agencies, political influence maps, and at the bottom, targets, thousands of them, profiles of civilians, community leaders, activists, journalists, people they had flagged as threats to the operation, people marked for surveillance, discrediting, or worse. Jackson exhaled slowly. They built a kill list. Mitchell felt the weight settle on her shoulders like concrete. No, they built an empire. This is just how they protected it. Ghost tapped one final command, transferring the entire data set to DOJ servers before locking down the terminal. Mitchell sent a single encrypted message to Jordan Brooks. The board has been unmasked. Prepare final statement. As the tech team secured the servers, Mitchell stood in the center of the firm's empty lobby, staring at the glowing screen. The machine had revealed its masters. The final play had begun. By 9 a.m, the plaza in front of the Department of Justice was already filled. Protesters, families of victims, community leaders, civil rights activists, and media from every major network had gathered shoulder to shoulder. People held signs with names of those wrongly imprisoned. Some wore shirts with the word "Justice" stretched across their chests. Others stood silently with tears in their eyes, clutching photos of loved ones who had been lost to a system designed to break them. It wasn't just another press conference. It felt like history about to be written in real time. Inside the DOJ, Darius Brooks stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie for the 4th time. His heart pounded, but his face stayed still. Jordan stood nearby, watching quietly. They had argued about this moment for nearly an hour that morning. Jordan had insisted he should be the one to speak. It was his office, his title, his case. But Darius had refused to step aside. I'm the one they put in those cuffs, Darius had said. I'm the one they paraded through that town like I was nothing. This started with me. Let me finish it. Jordan had nodded without another word. Now, standing backstage with Mitchell and Jackson, Darius tried to steady his breathing. He could hear the energy building outside, the restless buzz of reporters, the hum of live broadcast equipment, the murmurs of thousands of people who had come to hear the final words that would close this chapter. Valerie Cruz, standing near the press line, whispered to her cameraman, "We're live in 60 seconds. Mitchell placed a hand on Darius's shoulder. Whatever happens when you walk out there, just know this. You already changed the game. You gave people something to fight for." Darius nodded, but he couldn't shake the weight pressing on his chest. The investigation had broken open a network of corruption so massive it still didn't feel real. Judges, police chiefs, prison executives, senators, men and women who had built careers and empires on the backs of people who looked just like him. But the worst part, the part that haunted him most, was knowing there were still more. People they hadn't caught yet. People still hiding in the shadows, waiting for the noise to die down so they could rebuild the machine under a new name. That's why this speech mattered. It wasn't about him. It wasn't even about the case. It was about making sure the world didn't forget. Mitchell gave him a nod. "It's time." Darius stepped toward the glass doors. As they slid open, the roar of the crowd hit him like a wave. Hundreds of cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Families stood together, hands clasped. At the center of it all stood a single podium bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice. Darius walked toward it slowly, every step echoing louder in his ears than the noise around him. Jordan stayed behind him, standing just off to the side. This was Darius's moment now. Darius reached the podium and placed both hands firmly on its sides. The plaza began to quiet. The cameras stopped flashing. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. He scanned the crowd, locking eyes with faces that mirrored pain, hope, and anger all at once. He swallowed hard and leaned into the microphone. "My name is Darius Brooks," he began, his voice strong but measured. "And today, I stand before you not as a victim, not as a headline, but as a man who was nearly destroyed by a system that was never built to protect people like me." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Darius let the words hang there, sinking in. What started as a traffic stop in a small town called Mill Creek uncovered something much bigger than any of us could have imagined. We found a machine, designed not to protect, but to profit. A system that turned people into commodities. A system that preyed on silence, on fear, and on power unchecked. He paused again, glancing at the front row where families held photos of sons, daughters, mothers, and fathers who had been stolen by that machine. Over the past few weeks, you've seen the arrests, you've heard the names, judges, police officers, executives, senators. But I am here to tell you that this is not where the story ends, because corruption does not die with arrests. It hides, it waits, and it survives in our silence. He leaned in closer, gripping the podium tighter. "So, today, I ask you, don't go quiet. Don't turn the page on this because the cameras will. Don't scroll past it because the headlines will change. Don't believe that the fight is over just because they want you to think it is." The crowd shifted, people leaning in, hanging on every word. Darius's voice grew louder, carrying across the plaza. "The real power in this country has never been in the hands of the wealthy or the connected. It has always been in the hands of the people who refuse to be silent, the people who stand up when others sit down, the people who say enough is enough, not just when the world is watching, but when no one is." He pointed toward the families. "To every person who has ever been told you don't belong, you do. To every family who has ever lost someone to this broken system, we see you. And to every survivor who has ever wondered if your voice matters, it does." A wave of emotion swept through the crowd. Some wiped tears. Others raised their fists. The plaza vibrated with something heavier than anger, something closer to resolve. Darius drew a long breath and delivered the words he had carried since the night they cuffed him on that empty road. Justice is not a courtroom. It is not a badge. It is not a title. Justice is us. It's what we demand. It's what we fight for. It's what we refuse to surrender, no matter how long it takes. He paused, scanning the crowd one last time. "I am not here because I won. I am here because I survived, and because too many never got the chance to stand here themselves." He leaned back, finishing with the only words that truly mattered. "Do not let their stories end in silence. Carry them, speak them, fight for them, because when we do, when we refuse to turn away, justice finds its way home." The crowd erupted, but Darius stepped back, refusing to bask in the moment. This wasn't about applause. This was about what came next. Jordan met him halfway, gripping his shoulder tightly. "You did what I couldn't," Jordan whispered. "You made them listen." Darius nodded, his voice quiet but certain. Now, let's make them remember. They had closed this chapter, but the war against the machine had only just begun. Some stories fade after the headlines die down. Some are remembered for a moment and then quietly disappear. But every once in a while, a story comes along that refuses to stay buried. A story that pulls back the curtain on something far bigger than anyone expected. What started as one man taking a wrong turn in a small town became a national reckoning. It exposed how easily justice can be bought, how deeply corruption can spread when no one is looking, and how dangerous silence can become when systems are designed to profit from it. Darius Brooks didn't set out to start a revolution. He didn't set out to make history. All he wanted was to make it home. But when the machine tried to swallow him like it had swallowed so many others before him, he made a choice. He chose to fight back, not with violence, not with revenge, but with something far more powerful. Proof. Proof that the system wasn't broken by accident. Proof that, for decades, people in power had turned justice into a business. And proof that the machine only worked as long as the rest of us stayed quiet. We watched as that small-town scheme unraveled into a national conspiracy. We watched as local cops, judges, and even senators fell one by one. And when the mask was finally ripped off, what we saw underneath was something far more terrifying than any single person or town. It was a network, a blueprint, a business model designed to target, exploit, and profit from human lives. But the most dangerous part? It had been hiding in plain sight all along, behind polished office doors, behind political speeches, behind legal jargon designed to confuse and distract. And the truth is, this wasn't just Mill Creek. It wasn't just about one sheriff, one DA, or one senator. This could happen anywhere. It has happened in other places, and it will happen again if we forget what we've seen. Because corruption doesn't just vanish when cameras show up. It doesn't disappear because people are arrested. It waits, it shifts, it finds new faces, new towns, new contracts, and that's why this story doesn't end here. The question is, what happens next? Will we let this moment pass like so many before it? Will we scroll past the names of victims, convinced it has nothing to do with us? Or will we finally decide that enough is enough? Because here's the truth. Justice is not a government agency. It's not a press conference. It's not a single man standing at a podium. Justice is a choice. It's a responsibility. It belongs to every one of us who refuses to stay silent. So today, we ask you, what side of that choice will you stand on? If this had happened in your city, to someone you know, would you have looked away? Or would you have spoken up? Drop a comment below and tell us, how does this story make you feel? Do you believe your community is safe from something like this? Or are you seeing the warning signs already? Your voice matters. Your experience matters. And the conversation starts with you. If you believe stories like this need to be heard, if you believe the truth deserves more than silence, do us a favor. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel, because we're not done, we're just getting started. There are more stories to tell, more systems to expose, and more people counting on all of us to make sure they're never silenced again. Thank you for watching. And remember, the fight for justice doesn't end when the cameras turn off. It begins when we refuse to forget. Stay vigilant, stay loud, and stay ready. Because together, we can tear down the machine, one story at a time.